Hey, Devin, are we doing this Zoom link or another one for the class? Okay, I'm muted too. Nope.
The biggest rock band ever with legendary
Okay, everybody, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Thanks, Alexandra. I'm gonna. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to History 116. So I hope that you had a nice weekend. Anyone have any interesting experiences they want to share with us?
I had a. Oh, you can go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Over the weekend, I finally saw The Last Samurai with my dad.
Ah, and so how did that go? Did you enjoy it, Ferris?
I thoroughly enjoyed it. Yeah, it was kind of weird seeing Tom Cruise in feudal Japan, but after a while, it made sense.
Yeah, that's pretty. I think that's a pretty fair assessment. Seeing Tom Cruise or any other American person, right, in that context, it seems like a kind of a cheesy thing. But there really were people that were coming from the United States to go teach um, military tactics and weapons techniques in Meiji Japan. Um, and that story is sort of a compilation of several stories that are actually true separately. So, all right. Well, I'm glad that you got to see that. So overall, you think it's a pretty good movie, Ferris?
Yep, enjoyed it so much. I downloaded the soundtrack.
It's a good soundtrack. All right. Thanks for sharing. Um, other cool weekend experiences.
I got a kitten.
You got a kitten? Is it a
Yeah.
he or a she kitten?
It's a she. Her name is Coco.
Coco. Okay. Like Coco with the OA at the end or just COCO?
COCO.
Okay. And what color is she?
She's black and white. I can show you
Yeah,
guys her.
show us. Okay. Yes. And they have to like show the cat. Yes.
She's like a month and a week old, so she's very small right now.
She's very cute.
Yeah.
Hi, Coco. Thank you for sharing. Well, that makes today just so much brighter. For today, I had in mind an activity, and it was too complicated. And I think that people are doing a lot of other work as well, so I decided we're not going to do it. If you're here today, we will give you full credit for the assignment. But we're going to talk about these people that are mentioned in the assignment. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to do a screen share with you all. As Devin has written, I think in the chat just now, the exams are being graded. We're looking to have them back up and graded and returned to you for Thursday. I think we're on track to get that done by that deadline. Any other questions that you might have before we get started, or concerns?
Will you be handing back the exams all at one time, or will it be like when you finish an exam, you'll hand it back?
Good question. So it kind of depends on, so in theory, they'll all go back at the same time. But we're going to be basically sort of grading the exams in Microsoft Word and then uploading them or sort of emailing them back through the Turnitin software. So because of that, it may come sort of in bunches or batches. But I think that you should get sort of relatively similar time frame for getting your exams back within the next like day or so. Also, I hope that you've had a chance to get a hold of Barefoot Again. Have you guys gotten the book yet? See some thumbs up. All right, good. So go ahead and get into it. Don't wait till the last minute. It's a very easy read, but it's also, I think, a bit of a difficult read in terms of the material. So, go ahead and get started on that. And soon you'll have to do some questions based on that. So, just don't wait Don't sleep on that. So that's all I wanted to say for today. Let's get into the PowerPoint. I'm going to do a screen share, and we'll go from there. So last class we were talking about this era of so-called Taisho democracy. This is a new time period in Japan with a new emperor who is much less of a leader, much less charismatic and sort of impressive than his father had been. But he is the person whose reign name is given to the time period from 1912 to 1926. And so even though we see the beginnings of this sort of Taisho surge in popular activism and sort of political participation happening before 1912, we really see it sort of come into its own during that relatively short Taisho period. So I want to talk a bit about, we discussed the rice riots, right? We discussed the protests that broke out because of the price of rice and the sort of the disparity between the price that people were being paid as farmers for their rice and the price that they were being forced to pay to consume rice. That was a couple classes ago. And then last class, we talked about the sort of new surge in women's literature and the new trends and the sort of the new modern Western style mobo trends, those kinds of things. And so we're kind of going, we're still in that same time period today. But I want to talk about a figure who also, I think, brings these issues into a sort of more political sort of establishment role. This is the figure of Harake, who is, unlike the previous prime ministers, all of whom are from the elite samurai class or with ties to the imperial court, in a few cases, all of whom are closely tied to, if not members of the military. This is the rise of a real politician who went from being elected as a politician and rising through the ranks to becoming a bureaucrat in the home ministry, becoming himself home minister in 1906. He, in fact, works with the much more elite Ito Hirobumi, who you may recall as the person who helped to write the Meiji Constitution. They together found this new party called the Friends of Constitutional Government. This is the Seiyukai. That's actually missing the slide, but Seiyukai is the name of their political party. And it really is meant to be sort of a liberal party, right? To sort of embrace the new momentum that they see, they foresee as sort of auguring a new kind of Japan in the 20th century. It's going to be more full of popular participation, more full of activism, and just the masses being involved. So by the time that from when he's home minister in 1906 until he becomes prime minister in 1918, he really builds a political system around himself, and he works the system, right? So he begins to appoint members of his new party to offices in the home ministry, and then as he rises through the ranks, he'll do so, increasingly. So as prime minister, he will really bring Seiyukai members into roles of prominence, and he's also getting the masses sort of on the side of government by giving them sort of by working with them, right? So he would give farmers incentives to vote for his party by bringing things that are needed to their communities, right? He would also bring the interests of construction companies, right, and ones that make cement and brick to his party by giving in exchange things that would make their life easier. So he really is sort of the epitome of pork barrel politics, and the first of its kind really in Japan. So he's prime minister in 1918. It is he who becomes prime minister in the sort of an acknowledgement by the Meiji government, by the Taisho government, that they need someone who can actually deal with the people of Japan who are so now present and visible. He is the person who sort of puts down the rice riots and finds some compromises and makes things sort of work out. This is the first time we have an actual political party that is associated with this prime ministership in Japan. So it's a big deal. And he manages to dissolve a lot of labor issues that are happening at the time. And so while on the one hand, extremists on the right are worried that he's going to be pushing Japan more towards the sort of the left and towards the popular, overly sort of democratic kind of government. He's actually killed for that purpose, assassinated. He's very successful. And so from then on, we do see that the political party becomes a major sort of player in who becomes prime minister. So we'll have prime ministers who are actually party men, right, from then on in modern Japan as a whole. So the exception to that being members of the military, but who still are typically endorsed by the dominant party. And this list that you can see here briefly just goes through some of these figures. So, there's some different parties we'll talk about over the course of the next few classes. But the Seiyukai is the more liberal party, and the Kenseito is the less liberal party. And these two kind of represent the two-party groups that are competing. They're still relatively elite. They're still elected members coming from a very small 2% of the population of Japanese men, but they are definitely neither one of them extremely to the right or to the left. They're both sort of centrist parties, so to speak. So one thing I wanted to sort of come back to was sort of different people's experiences. And so part of this new momentum that's growing amongst the masses, it sort of continues to bring people from all different groups of society, be it different gender groups, as well as different socioeconomic groups, different occupational groups, to try and find a way to have their voices be heard. And one of the groups that I think we may have talked about, but I'm not quite sure, is the Borakumin group. This is a group of people that have really had done such important work for Japan as the ones who do all of the jobs that are ritually impure, typically, right? So, tanning hides, as we can see here, being done, to, dealing with dead bodies, to sometimes even dealing with things like with urine, more because they were available to do it and they had good networks of exchange to be able to transport night soil and urine for farmers from urban areas which were more affluent to the countryside. From the that's right, from the urban areas to the countryside for use as fertilizer. But anyway, the new government, the Meiji government, had liberated them as well as everyone else from the class system that was so rich before, but they were not really able to escape, right, this their ties to certain neighborhoods, especially in sort of the Osaka area of sort of south central Honshu. And also sometimes names that they chose when people got last names in Japan were very tied to their backgrounds as Burakumin or Hinin, and so they sort of carry this with them. And so one of the things that happens is they begin to organize themselves to mutually collaborate and to share, to save money and share their savings, and to sort of just help one another out in 1800. And then they turn this into an actual union of their class. People also have this occupation called the Leveler Society in 1822. So this is just one group that sort of takes advantage of what's happening and what they see as popular protest and popular voices being raised, and bring it, you know, to apply to their cases as well. This is actually a big year 22. It's also a year in which you know, a lot of important things happen in Japan that do, again, point to the needle moving closer, you know, further towards the left, towards more popular support and towards more government attention to the masses. Article 5, which prohibits women from taking part in political meetings or being part of political parties, is repealed. We'll discuss that more in a second. But the insurance law, which requires medium and large companies to give all employees health insurance, it's a big deal. This is a sort of a landmark movement in Japan that reflects a lot of the efforts of people like Suzuki Bunshi, who we talked about a few classes ago, and labor organizers who are trying to, you know, have this kind of thing put in place. We also have a factory law that year, which is going to raise minimum wage. But most importantly, it's going to raise the sums that you get if you are injured or injured or die on the job. It also raises the amount of sick pay. So these elements are actually relatively small in terms of their impact on the working class, but they do sort of demonstrate that the working class has been heard a little bit. So in that sense, it's important. And again, the labor unions of Japan see these insurance law, factory law as victories. It's also the year in which the Communist Party of Japan is officially founded. And I'll come back to that again in a second as well. So if we're thinking about timelines, right, 1922, we're only 5 years after the Bolshevik Revolution that sort of inaugurates real communism at the level of a nation state. But Japan has begun to at least briefly allow this kind of ideology to circulate in the Taisho period openly and legally. We talked about this figure, Hiratsuko Daicho. We talked about her magazine, her literary magazine, Blue Stocking. We didn't talk about her close associate and then another editor of Blue Stocking, Ito Noe. And so I want to talk a little bit about these people now as we think about, again, the continued legacy, right, of the Taisho period of sort of progressive ideals and nonconformity in terms of ideologies about gender and about class. So we talked a bit about this, but I'll mention it again. We talked about Hiratsuko Daicho and another figure who was important in the Blue Stocking organization, Ichikawa Fusae, who together started the New Women Association. We talked about this, and it is their work that pays off in 22 eventually to get Article 5 repealed. So I want to talk about some other figures here. I may actually skip to here and then go back to make this make more sense. So Ito Noe was herself also a feminist and a very sort of excited follower of the work being done by Hiratsuko Daicho and Ichikawa Fusae. And so she herself goes through a relatively elite education, attending great institutions for women in Japan. And then she becomes the editor of Seito, 1915, so only for a year. But in that year, she really takes it to the next level of making it very political, right? So she promotes women's rights to have abortions. She's arguing against prostitution as a legal licensed form of livelihood, and as sort of this an outlet for men's sexual needs. She's an advocate for free love, which is a bit of a catchy word, a catchy sort of phrase in the Taisho period, which really has to do with opposing the arranged marriage and supporting women's right to choose their partner, and men's as well. and she's also going to be writing about the importance of motherhood as a central building block for the country, that therefore needs more resources and more freedoms for women. So in that year, right, these very sort of directly political kinds of statements draw a lot of government censors' attention, and it is in fact banned 5 times before it eventually is forced to close its doors in 1916. She also is responsible for translating feminist anarchist works by Emma Goldman, as part of a larger movement called Fabian Socialism. So anyway, she is part of this movement as well that is sort of pushing the edges and the boundaries of what is, what can be said about the government and about the different roles people have in Japanese society, and drawing on international sort of non-Japanese figures to do that. Let's go back to here. Yeah. So still on the sort of more radical side of the spectrum, following upon the founding of the Socialist Party, I want to talk about Kotoku Shusui, who is a figure who was very active back at the turn of the 20th century. We talked about a few classes ago the Great Treason Incident, if you'll recall, and the execution of 12 political political dissidents, all of whom clearly now we know had really no ties to any plot to kill the emperor. They were killed because their ideologies were too controversial and sort of countercultural. And we talked about Kotoku Shusui, for example, as one of those people who was killed during this in this event. But I go back to him because he sort of plants the seed that will later on become the socialist movement in Japan. And he translates the works of Peter Kropotkin, who is a Russian writer, who, along with others like Tolstoy, are really influential for leftist thinkers in Japan. He founds the Communist newspaper in 1903, which is also oftentimes very quickly shut down. And so as we move forward in time, these seeds that he's planted become really much more, they blossom, I guess you could say, in the Taisho period after his death. One figure who is continuing his legacy, that of Kotoku Shusui, is Osugi Sakai, who takes a different, he actually goes to military academy to become, to pursue a career in the military, but doesn't like it, and eventually and he leaves. But so that he has written, he wrote a really interesting autobiography about his life. But anyway, he survives. He's not around to be rounded up. He could not be tied at all to this Great Treason Incident, so he survives this. And so in the 13, 14, in the early Taisho period, he really takes the possibility of socialism very seriously, and starts to lead strikes throughout the country and to publish things about anarchism and radical socialist thought. And he becomes sort of perhaps the most influential socialist thinker and activist in Taisho period. Continues to translate things also by anarchist thinkers in Russia, like Kropotkin as well. Let's see. The Communist Party, founded in 1922, is more of a mainstream effort, right, to create a communist party that can be one of Japan's parties, along with Kinseito and Seiyukai, and somewhat of a surprise decision, no one shuts them down, right? So the young men who are students at the Tokyo Imperial University, they found this organization, and they are arguing that socialism can be a system of government and not just a tool to tear down government as anarchists would like it to be. And so they create this party, which will be the foundation for the party that will be important in Japan and still is important in Japan today, as a part of the establishment, but trying to promote communism instead of capitalism. And I mentioned May Day because May Day 1920 is a big international May Day celebration in which the Communist Party in Japan that has not yet founded itself does get a lot of inspiration. So we just see a lot of groups here, right, trying to find their place in this new Taisho era Japan, this new modernizing Japan, and we see them having a lot of success. Success that they wouldn't have had before. The Communist Party actually, if we go back to 1900, there was already an effort to found a socialist party in Japan that lasted only for a few days. It was shut down the next day, basically, by the authorities. So, using the public order police law of 1900. So this is really a big change in the political landscape of Taisho era Japan. Okay, let me go back here. Okay, so thinking back to sort of mainstream political thinkers and what's happening, the Communist Party is doing their thing, but even more at the center of mainstream political thought are a few ideologues or intellectuals who are actually Imperial University professors who are trying to find a way to make sense of Japan, which is a monarchy, but also has a lot of language in its constitution and also in a lot of sort of founding ideals that are progressive and democratic, right? That also, in some ways, are part of the constitution. And so I want to talk first of all about Yoshino Sakuzo, someone that I work on quite a bit. He is sort of the epitome of the rise that some young men had as they came from, in his case, he came from Sendai, so he came from northern Japan to go to the Imperial University, and then there falls in love with sort of the kinds of intellectual currents that are floating around the Imperial University. He travels. Let's see, where does he go to? He travels to Germany, and he also travels to Great Britain to learn more about government and constitutions and these kinds of things. And then he serves as the tutor to Yuan Shikai over in China for a while as well, and so he learns about this figure who is at this point sort of like a very important. He wasn't. What do we call him? He's sort of at this point he is. A top-ranking general in the Qing government at that point. So he comes back to Japan with all this experience and becomes professor at the Imperial University where he studied. And he develops an ideology which he calls Minpon Shugi, or popular democracy. So what this means is that Japan should be a true democracy. The people really need to be represented. So this means that we cannot have a population of 2% of men that elects the Diet. That means that the country's military cannot be controlled either by the military itself or by the emperor. And so this is a relatively revolutionary idea for us to talk about today, seeing how things turned out. But at the time, a universal suffrage to elect a diet that was going to actually be, constitutionally bound and was going to reflect the people of Japan's, sort of will with, in terms of sort of numerically speaking. At the time, the language that Yoshino Sakuzo used seemed to make sense to a lot of people, right? And sort of it fit in with the mood of I think the sort of the upper classes and the middle classes in Japan at the time. So these were known theories that he published the first ones in 1915, 1916. So they were already well established, and they had become part of the basis for other thinkers at the Imperial University and elsewhere in Japan as well. Although, as you can imagine, these are relatively liberal ideas about governments in Japan. across the hall, there
Well,
was.
I
Oh,
have a
sorry.
quick question.
Let me take a second and go back. Okay. I think Ellie, you have a question?
Yes. So wait, when you say that he believed in universal suffrage, did that include women, or was it universal male suffrage that he was after?
Good question. So I think publicly he was mostly talking about universal manhood suffrage or male suffrage, but he was in favor of women's suffrage as well. But I think in terms of what he wrote about, mostly though, he was arguing that that Japan needed at least at first to have universal male suffrage. So
Okay,
thank you,
thank
Ellie.
you.
Good point. I think that someone a couple classes ago mentioned the Shinjin Kai, but as part of our discussion last class, it was about new men, right? The Shinjin Kai is really he founds this institution as a way to try and prepare men who are students at the Imperial University to become public figures who are committed to serving Japan. They have their own sort of dormitory where they hang out and talk about the future of Japan. They'll eventually create like a house, a settlement house where people who are trying to get back on their feet can go and live as they get employment and become part of society again. It sort of is a hot spot for social activists who are trying to help improve Japan and help the workers in Japan to have better lives. So he's at the heart of that, and many of the figures from that group go on to become members of the Communist Party in 1922, or leading philosophers or intellectuals who are going to be trying to advocate for a more democratic Japan over the next several decades. Across the hall, in the same building at the Imperial University, is another professor of law and politics, Minobe Tatsukichi. Sorry, that should be Tatsu, but that's anyway. Tatsukichi. He is actually very well respected, and he himself has another theory about government that he's also promoting. And some would say it's more controversial. I'm not sure that that's fair, but anyway, his idea for how to sort of organize, right, the monarchy and the constitution and the people of Japan together is called the organ theory. And again, the Tenno Kikansetsu should be an S there. Is essentially an argument that the people that Japan is like a body, right? And the Japan's kokutai, our national polity, is like a body, and the fact that kokutai, has the character for body as the second character, it really sort of makes sense, right? For his argument, and that the most important thing for Japan was the perseverance and the improvement of this national body. And so, how do you do that? And he argues that you do that by having the emperor, who is the head of the body, but work with the rest of the body, right? So that the people of Japan are an organ, and the government is an organ, and that and all that. Of course, the issue is that even if the emperor is the head, he is still only an organ of the state. But at the time, this is another very popular theory on how to make democracy work in this monarchy to make it make sense. And so he also is able, from 1913-14 to propagate this theory, and it is also very influential. And so if you had talked 1920-23 before the Kanto earthquake with intellectuals in Japan, they probably would have told you that Japan was really moving towards the left and towards a more democratic kind of government, a more inclusive government. And the works of Minobe and of Yoshino were really proof of that. Let's talk about another figure here, Kitaiki, next. A very different kind of thinker. Kita really tried to to find. He sort of tried on all the different hats. He tried on socialism, and he tried on anarchism, and he tried on some fascist thoughts as well. He tried on all the different hats he could think. He really tried to read it all. He read a lot of Neo-Confucian thought as well. He was really intellectual, but he was not a professor, so he didn't necessarily have the rigor, the systematic study that the other people I talked about had. But anyway, essentially he on his own comes up with a way to make sense of the constellation of the emperor and the constitution of the people of Japan. And it's really kind of a mess, right? It really combines ideologies which in theory are all in conflict. And he sort of picks what he likes from each one of the ideologies. And so his 1919 sort of booklet, A Plan for the Reorganization of Japan, is sort of like a fantastical blueprint for a new Japan. And one of the ideas he's talking about is that the people and the emperor should be closer together, right? That there are, in the middle, there's a lot of politics, a lot of politicians who are sort of middlemen who are unnecessary and who are actually impeding the people's will from the ear of the emperor. And so he sort of wants to create a system in which that will no longer be the case. And his new political system is a mixture of socialism with a lot of right-wing thought. And it comes out and how it's executed, and it would be sort of a form of national socialism, which, as you may know, is the official sort of ideological designation for Nazism. He advocated for a coup d'etat by patriots who wanted to bring the people of Japan closer to the emperor. And then from there, he hoped that Japan could then move under the emperor's direct leadership to liberate all of Asia from Western imperialism. So this is a really quick overview of his thought. 1919, it was not very popular because it didn't make a lot of sense, I think, and because 1919, Yoshino Sakuzo's ideas and the ideas also of Minamoto Tatsukichi and others were much more popular, and they were much more rigorous, and they sort of were well constructed, and intellectuals give those points of view a lot of respect. As we'll see, ideologies, even though they aren't necessarily fully logical, right? They can have a lot of appeal, and we'll see how this picks up later on. But in the short term, his ideas sort of lay relatively dormant. He also is not arrested or anything like that. He's able to live his life and continue on. So we discussed, I think it was a couple classes ago, the Great Kanto earthquake, which is kind of a turning point. A lot of the optimism of the Taisho period and all of this movement towards popular sort of political participation and involvement and inclusion comes to a bit of a halt. A lot of the fears of the population, but also of officials, of the masses, they reemerge, and we see a swing towards the right begin to take place. Let me go. Sorry. During the earthquake itself, one of the well, two things happened that I guess I should mention. One is that anti-Korean racism sort of just explodes in Japan. Rumors that Koreans in Japan have poisoned the wells become very rampant, and of course now we know that if you have an earthquake, well water becomes murky because that's what happens when you shake up a groundwater source. But at the time, murky water and wells was sort of proof that the Koreans were trying to poison the Japanese, who were, mercilessly carrying out their colonization of their country. And so a lot of anti-Korean riots take place in Japan, especially in major cities like Tokyo and Osaka. So this is one of the things that happens that's very unfortunate. Another is that the police in Japan, who have sort of been watching this trend towards more liberal tendencies take shape, is now able again to step in and say, enough, right? Enough of all this radical stuff. We need law and order. We need things to be very clear. And in that, a lot of police turn a blind eye to the killings of Koreans, who they say, oh, sure, they're poisoning the wells. But they also sometimes themselves perpetrate political murders, the most famous of which are the murder of Osugi Sakai, who I mentioned a little while ago today, and the editor, activist Ito Noe, who were actually both in prison. So the police actually killed them in prison. And when say they were in prison, because they with their ideas being so radical, they went to prison a lot for a few days or a few weeks at a time, and they were released because they were not threats to the national polity. But in prison during the Great Kakato earthquake, a captain Amakasu decided to go in and just to kill them. And what you can maybe not see well here is that this is an article from the New York Times in which the reporter is talking about the murder by the captain of the gendarmerie, Amakasu, having committed these important murders. And what you can also see very, very, sort of difficultly perhaps, is that he served 3 years, but for 3 murders, although it should have been a much longer sentence, it was reduced greatly by amnesty. So the point I guess I'm getting to here is that the killing of these political dissidents who were in prison and therefore defenseless by a member of the police in Japan earned this person 3 years and no more, because the government as a whole was unable to hold him accountable for this because things had changed. So what had changed between 23 and 26? What had changed to allow for amnesty, which may have come even from the emperor himself or the Privy Council? What had changed? What had really changed was the passage of the Universal Male Suffrage Law, which we talked about last class, is a really big victory for democracy in Japan. Men, at least men, right, who were over 25 and who were not on the government dole, not on welfare, they could vote. So this is going to lead to an explosion of voting in Japan, and a really much more democratic kind of country for Japan. But the same year, the next day, in fact, the police law makes its way through the Imperial Diet, and this is as I mentioned last class, the law that makes it a crime for anyone to try to alter Japan's national polity or its national body, or capitalism, which is the system that sort of holds this body together, they argue. And also the kokutai is also sort of tied with the image of the emperor. So if you were talking about killing the emperor or harming the emperor or deposing the emperor or just removing the emperor as a figure, right, in your government, these are all things that can be, that are highly punishable. Imprisonment or imprisonment with hard labor for up to 10 years. So this is part of what's changed. The Imperial Diet makes things much, it makes this big step to make its own makeup more democratically elected, but it also passes a law which is made to suppress dissent and to remove opposition and to silence opposition in Japan. So as we look from 1925 onwards, and we'll start to see more things happening as well, the kind of government that would pardon or give amnesty, I should say, to Captain Amakasu will make more sense and be more easier to understand. I think those are all my slides I wanted to go through. Just go back a little bit here. So I had hoped to talk about Shimsaka's a little bit today and about Kitaiki. But essentially what I want you to walk away with from today's lecture is that there were these different ideas, right, that were popular and that were around and that were not even censored or banned, but that after 25 will become problematic. And people talk about Japan, sometimes talk about how Japan sort of went through the motions of modernization too fast and became democratic too quickly, and in doing so they didn't get it. Right? And that's one of these sort of typical highly problematic ways of trying to describe Japan's processes of democratization and modernization. What we can see here is that that doesn't make any sense, and that what actually happens is that the Japanese are really, they're like many other countries in the West and elsewhere in the world, they really are looking at two options, right? They're an option that is democratic and embracing constitutionalism and embracing liberal progressive ideals, and an option that is conservative and even reactionary and sort of interested in control and the status quo. And both of these two are sort of vying for influence, and that for at least 15 years, the more progressive liberal side of things was making the most headway and was the most popular and was winning. And that a number of events that we'll talk about over the next several classes were necessary to decide Japan's sort of fate towards authoritarianism and conservative or reactionary political ideologies. So that's all I wanted to say today. Trying to remember these terms, Nippon Shugi or popular democracy, and maybe also the term organ theory from Tatsukichi, from excuse me, from Tatsukichi. And I will be sure and get a hold of the Barefoot Gimpy if you don't have it yet. Start reading that, and I will go ahead and let those of you who have to go somewhere else go. If you have questions, you can please hold, here to answer questions. And Ferris, if you have a second, I want to ask you something as well, if you're still on the line. So thank you, everybody. And if you don't have questions, I can let you go.
I have a quick question about the barefoot reading.
Yes.
So
Ashley, right?
for the questions I was just looking at it. It says that you have to read pages 1 through 74 to answer questions 1 through 5, but there's 6 questions on there. So do I have to finish reading all of it to answer the final question, or?
I will check that. I'll check on that, and I will email you all about that, because I don't remember if my feeling is that I want you to read just that amount, right, for the questions. So I will look at that, and I will email you guys about that tomorrow, Ashley.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Yes, Naya.
So when is it actually, like the reading?
When is it due? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
So I'm going to stop my screen share here and go to the syllabus. Not that one.
I'm also facing the library too, and it's on your screensaver.
Give me a second. Let me get out of my screen share here. I thought I was out, but I'm not out yet. Okay, so you are okay, so let's see. Okay, so what I have on the syllabus. Where is it? Okay, here it is. All right, so the questions are due on October 20th. So that would be next Tuesday. They're due before class, and there'll be a folder for that up on Moodle.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right.
Professor, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Denny.
Somebody shared a link of, I guess, like a PDF of the manga. Is it okay to start that while I wait for my book?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Because I just gotta wait for the book, and I don't know if they're different. That's why I ask.
I mean, if you want, you can send me the PDF. I'm not sure I've seen that, but if you have some form of the book,
It was
there's only one version that's the
somewhere
one
in the
I was.
chat. It's right here.
It's
Kenneth
in
Heisel.
archive.org version of the book. And I found that online myself last week. And
Oh,
it
okay.
seems to be a different publishing date. So I wasn't sure if it was okay to recommend that as a online resource. I wasn't sure if, because it was a different year of publishing, if it's going to be the same one that is on the syllabus.
Looking at it, I mean, I'm looking at it here briefly. It looks like it's fine. So, just sort of make sure where it ends. Yeah, this is fine. Yeah, this is totally fine. So if you have that, that is fine. You can't highlight and do those kinds of things, but if you have the if you can get this PDF, that's also fine.
Perfect. Thank you, Professor. Have a good one.
Sure.
Another quick question.
Sure,
So
Ashley.
will exam 2 be set up just like exam 1, like we'll have a time period to take it, or is it going to be during the scheduled time that's on Spire?
It will also be a take home
Okay.
2-hour self-timed exam.
All right, so the time that's on Spire if that's irrelevant for us?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I'll have to see what time it says, but I will probably have it due by that time, like at the end of that time period.
Mhm. All right, thank you.
Sure.
I actually have a quick question about an assignment that's due in a couple minutes for History 275.
Okay.
Will the historian's journal be posted? The
Oh yeah.
assignment? Okay.
Yeah, I'll
Because
put the
I
link up
did
for
it, but I didn't see it on Moodle, so I wasn't sure where I should put that.
Where to put that? Yeah, it'll be up there in a couple minutes.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you.
Sure. All right, Carrie, any questions? All right, good. All right, Devin, I'm gonna stop recording.